The taste of bitter ash coated her tongue. The darkness was absolute, heavy, suffocating. Eleanor tried to move her hand, but her knuckles scraped against a wall of padded silk. She tried to stretch her legs, but her shoes hit a solid wooden barrier. A terrible realization washed over her like ice water. She was trapped in a box. The air was incredibly thin, and a deep, vibrating rumble echoed from somewhere outside. She was in a casket, and she was entirely alone in the dark. This is a story about the ultimate betrayal, a story of a woman who is sent to the grave, only to rise from it and take back everything that was stolen from her. Eleanor Vance was the sole heir to a massive real estate empire in the Hudson Valley. Her father had passed away a year ago, leaving her with an unimaginable fortune and a sprawling historic estate. She thought she had a rock to lean on. Her husband, Julian, was charming, attentive, and always knew how to make her smile. They had just celebrated their 3rd anniversary with a quiet romantic dinner at home. Julian had cooked the meal himself. He poured the expensive red wine. He kissed her forehead. And then the world had faded to black. Eleanor had always trusted him completely. She never noticed the subtle signs of his greed. She never saw the way he looked at her bank statements. She never suspected that the man sharing her bed was quietly calculating the exact dosage of a paralyzing toxin needed to stop her heart just long enough to fool a medical examiner. The violent shaking of the vehicle suddenly stopped. Eleanor lay paralyzed in the pitch black. The chemical cocktail still coursing through her veins made her limbs feel like lead. She could hear the crunch of gravel outside. Heavy boots stepped out of a truck cabin. A door slammed shut. The metallic clank of a tailgate dropping sent a shockwave of terror through her chest. She wanted to scream. She opened her mouth, but her vocal cords refused to work. Only a shallow, rasping breath escaped her lips. Her heart hammered wildly against her ribs. The casket tilted backward. She slid down, her feet pressing hard against the polished mahogany. They were moving her. They were taking her to her final resting place. The sheer horror of the situation threatened to pull her into unconsciousness. She prayed this was just a horrible nightmare. She prayed she would wake up in her warm bed at the estate. The casket landed on solid ground with a heavy thud. The impact rattled her teeth. Eleanor strained her ears, desperate for any sound that might explain this madness. Then she heard it, set it down right here. The voice was smooth, confident, and utterly familiar. It was Julian, her beloved husband. Eleanor's mind raced. Was this a sick joke? Julian always loved extreme sports and bizarre surprises. Maybe this was some twisted escape room experience he had booked for them. But the dark, cold reality of the wooden box felt too permanent, too real. The lock on the casket clicked. The lid lifted just an inch. A rush of cold, damp cemetery air swept over her face. The heavy scent of pine needles and wet earth filled her lungs. She could finally breathe a little deeper. She waited for Julian to laugh, to pull the lid open, and tell her the joke was over. But the laugh never came. Finally! That obnoxious woman is exactly where she belongs. The female voice pierced the silence like a sharp knife. It was Chloe, Eleanor's best friend since college. The woman who had held her hand at her father's funeral. Eleanor's blood ran cold. The physical paralysis was nothing compared to the emotional agony that suddenly gripped her soul. Julian and Chloe, they were together. They had planned this. Every smile, every comforting hug, every late-night conversation over coffee. It was all a lie. They had conspired to murder her. I still cannot believe we actually pulled this off. Julian's voice was full of relief and dark triumph. The gravediggers have loosened the lid so she can breathe her last few breaths of dirt. The toxin leaves the bloodstream in 24 hours. No medical examiner will ever find a trace. I made sure of it. Eleanor lay completely still. The drugs prevented her from moving, but her mind was terrifyingly sharp. She felt a slight breeze slip through the crack in the casket. We got so lucky her old man died last year, Julian continued, his voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. If he was still around, we would have had to deal with him too. Chloe giggled, a sickening, sweet sound that made Eleanor want to vomit. Now we have the estate, the accounts, everything. We are finally free, darling." They were holding hands. Eleanor could sense it. The intimate proximity of their voices betrayed their secret romance. Greed and lust had driven the two people she loved most to bury her alive. A dog barked loudly nearby. The sharp, frantic sound interrupted their gloating. "Shut that filthy mutt up!" Chloe snapped, her glamorous facade cracking. "Can you not see we are having a private moment of mourning?" A gruff voice apologized from a distance. "Sorry about that, folks. Buster just gets a little anxious around new people." It was an older man, the cemetery caretaker. Eleanor imagined springing up from the padded silk, screaming, and watching Julian and Chloe run in absolute terror. But she could not even blink. Her eyelids felt glued shut. Even if she could move, what would happen? Julian was desperate. He was standing right over an open grave. If she revealed she was alive now, he might just grab a shovel and finish the job himself. Desperate people commit horrific acts, and Julian was about to inherit millions. He could easily pay off a gravedigger to look the other way. Or worse, bury them all. Eleanor made a terrifying choice. She forced herself to remain completely limp. She would play dead until her murderers were gone. It was her only chance at survival. "Are you two finished here?" Julian called out. His tone was dismissive and arrogant. "Give us 20 minutes, the older worker replied from the depths of the open grave. Julian sighed loudly. "Let us get out of here, Chloe. I cannot stand the smell of this place anymore. I want a stiff drink at that new Italian place downtown. I am exhausted from all this fake crying," Chloe complained, the sound of her expensive leather trench coat rustling as she turned away. They did not even leave a flower. They did not say a final goodbye. The sound of their footsteps crunched away on the gravel path. A car engine roared to life in the distance and faded away. Eleanor was left alone with the gravediggers. The reality of her situation settled in. The lid was still cracked open, but the heavy dirt was about to fall. The paralysis was slowly fading, but her muscles were still incredibly weak. "Strange folks," a young male voice muttered just outside the casket. Not a single tear, no flowers, nothing. Just dumped her and left. The older man, Arthur, grunted in agreement. "I have seen a lot of things in my 30 years working these grounds, Tyler. But that right there, that was pure ice. Must be some rich orphan girl with a terrible husband. Buster, get back here." The dog barked again, closer this time. He was whining, scratching at the wood of the casket. The lid shifted slightly under the dog's weight. Arthur tied the dog to a nearby iron fence. "Sit down and be quiet, Buster," he commanded sternly. Arthur turned to his young assistant. "All right, Tyler. You can head home. I will finish filling this one in myself. My back is used to the ache. Go on, get out of here." Tyler thanked him, grabbed his backpack, and walked away. Arthur just wanted some peace and quiet. The first shovelful of heavy wet earth hit the top of the casket. The sound was deafening inside the wooden box. Eleanor panicked. She tried to move her jaw. She managed a small, pathetic moan. The dog, Buster, went absolutely crazy. He broke free from his rope, leaped into the shallow grave, and started digging frantically at the lid. "What is wrong with you, you crazy dog?" Arthur yelled, dropping his shovel. "Get out of there." But the dog refused to listen. He kept whining and scratching, his nose pressed right against the crack in the wood. Eleanor focused all her remaining strength on her vocal cords. "Help!" The word came out as a raspy, broken whisper. But the dog heard it. He barked even louder. Arthur sighed heavily and climbed down into the grave to grab the dog by the collar. "Come here, you big idiot!" As he reached down, he froze. He heard the whisper too. Arthur slowly reached out and pushed the heavy wooden lid to the side. The dim evening light filtered into the box. He looked down and gasped, stumbling backward into the dirt wall of the grave. "Sweet, merciful heaven," he whispered, crossing himself. Too terrified, silver eyes were staring back at him from the pale face of the corpse. "Please," Eleanor managed to choke out. "Please help me." Arthur scrambled forward. his rough dirt-stained hands gently gripping her shoulders. He helped pull her into a sitting position. Her joints popped and ached. She took a massive, greedy gulp of fresh air. Her lungs burned. "You are alive," Arthur stammered, his eyes wide with pure shock. "I need to call an ambulance. I need to call the sheriff." "No." Eleanor grabbed his dirty jacket with trembling fingers. "No police, no doctors. You cannot tell anyone. They will come back and finish the job." "Who will come back?" Arthur asked, thoroughly bewildered. "My husband," Eleanor cried, tears finally streaming down her cold cheeks. "He poisoned me. He wanted my money. Please, you have to get me out of here. Take me away. Hide me. I am begging you." The sheer desperation in her voice moved the old caretaker. Arthur looked around the empty, darkening cemetery. Nobody was watching. He nodded slowly. "All right, girl. Let us get you out of this hole." He wrapped his thick wool coat around her shivering shoulders. With incredible effort, he hoisted her up out of the grave. The dog, Buster, danced around them, licking Eleanor's cold hands. She clung to the old man as they stumbled through the rows of granite headstones. They walked until they reached a small, weathered cabin at the very edge of the cemetery. It was Arthur's groundskeeper shack, safe, hidden, and off the grid. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of strong coffee and wood smoke. Arthur guided Eleanor to a worn armchair near an old cast-iron stove. He locked the heavy wooden door and pulled the curtains shut. "Sit tight. I will brew some herbal tea. It will help flush whatever poison that monster gave you out of your system." Eleanor wrapped her trembling hands around the hot ceramic mug when he brought it over. The warmth seeped into her bones. Her mind began to clear. The drugs were finally losing their grip. She looked at the old man. "Thank you. You saved my life. You and your dog." She reached down and scratched Buster behind the ears. The big dog rested his heavy head on her knees, sighing happily. Arthur sat across from her. "I have buried hundreds of people, miss, but I have never unburied one. Your husband is a devil walking the earth. What are you going to do now? You cannot hide here forever." "I am not going to hide." Eleanor's voice was suddenly steady. The fear was evaporating, replaced by a cold, burning rage. "They thought they could take my life and steal my family's legacy. I am going to destroy them. But I need your help, Arthur. I need to trap him. I will pay you anything you ask." Arthur waved his calloused hand dismissively. "Keep your money, girl. I do not want a dime for doing the right thing. That husband of yours belongs in a concrete cell. Tell me what you need me to do." Eleanor leaned forward, her eyes flashing in the dim light of the cabin. "Tomorrow morning you are going to call Julian. You are going to tell him that you know what he did. Tell him you saw me breathing. Demand blackmail money, a large sum. Tell him to meet you right here at the cabin. When he shows up, we will catch his confession on tape." The next morning, the fog rolled thick across the cemetery lawns. Arthur stood by the window, holding his cheap burner phone. He dialed the number Eleanor had provided. The phone rang 3 times before Julian picked up. "What is it?" Julian answered irritably. "I am in mourning." "Listen to me very carefully, rich boy," Arthur growled, channeling his best tough guy persona. "I was filling in the grave last night. I saw the lid was open. I saw your wife breathing. I know what you did." There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. "What do you want?" Julian finally whispered, his voice trembling with sudden panic. $50,000 in cash, Arthur demanded. "Bring it to the groundskeeper cabin at the edge of Oakbridge Cemetery. 3 o'clock today. Come alone, or I go straight to the county sheriff. Do we have a deal? I will be there," Julian snapped, and hung up. Eleanor spent the morning preparing. She borrowed some old work clothes from Arthur to replace her burial dress. Arthur had made a phone call of his own. Sheriff Davis, an old friend who patrolled the rural county, arrived quietly at the back door of the cabin. Arthur explained the entire insane situation. The sheriff listened, his face turning bright red with anger. "We are going to nail this arrogant prick to the wall," Sheriff Davis promised, checking his service weapon and hiding in the small storage closet near the entrance. Eleanor hid in the back bedroom. leaving the door cracked open just enough to see the main room. At exactly 3 o'clock, a luxury black SUV crunched up the gravel driveway. Julian stepped out. He looked nervous, clutching a heavy leather duffel bag. He approached the cabin and kicked the door. Arthur opened it, letting the monster step inside. "You are making a huge mistake, old man," Julian sneered as he walked into the dim cabin. He threw the heavy bag onto the rustic wooden table. "There is 50 grand in there. Now you keep your mouth shut. If I hear a single whisper about this, you will end up in a hole right next to my wife." Arthur stood his ground, crossing his arms over his chest. "Why did you do it? Why put a living woman in the dirt? It is a cruel way to die." Julian laughed, a cold, empty sound. She was a spoiled, arrogant princess. She thought she was better than me. I gave her enough sedatives to stop a horse. I figured she would just suffocate in her sleep. It is not my fault her metabolism burned through it too fast. It does not matter now. She is dead. I am rich, and you are bought and paid for. The confession was loud and clear. The trap was sprung. The door to the back bedroom slowly creaked open. Julian froze, his arrogant smile melting off his face. Eleanor stepped out into the light. She looked pale, exhausted, but her eyes burned with pure fury. "Hello, Julian," she said quietly. Julian stumbled backward, tripping over a rug. He looked like he had just seen a ghost. "Eleanor, no, this is impossible. You are dead. I watched them close the lid. I watched you die." Eleanor walked forward and delivered a stinging, open-handed slap, straight across his face. The crack echoed in the small cabin. "I am very much alive, darling, and your little performance is over." Julian panicked. He shoved Eleanor aside and bolted for the front door. But before he could reach the handle, Sheriff Davis stepped out of the closet, his gun drawn. "Going somewhere, Julian?" the sheriff asked coldly. "Buster," the dog growled fiercely, blocking the exit. It was over. The arrest was swift and brutal. Julian was slammed against the wall, handcuffs biting into his wrists. He blubbered and begged, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Later that evening at the precinct, the police brought Chloe in. When Chloe saw Eleanor sitting in the interrogation viewing room, she dropped to her knees. She produced an impressive flood of fake tears. "Eleanor, please," she sobbed, grabbing the bars of the holding cell. "Julian forced me to do it. He threatened me. I never wanted to hurt you. We are sisters." Eleanor looked at her former best friend with absolute disgust. "Save your tears for the judge, Chloe. I heard everything you said at the grave. Enjoy your new concrete home." She turned on her heel and walked out of the police station. The cool night air felt amazing. She was free, but returning to her massive, empty estate felt completely different now. The Vanderwood estate was silent. The grand hallways felt like a museum. Eleanor fired half her staff, unsure of who she could trust anymore. She spent a week resting, letting the last of the toxins leave her body. But her mind constantly drifted back to Arthur. The gruff old man had risked everything for a stranger. She drove her luxury sedan back to the cemetery, bringing baskets of expensive groceries, premium coffee, and a massive bag of gourmet treats for Buster. Arthur was surprised to see her. "I thought you would be sipping cocktails on a beach somewhere by now," he chuckled, letting her into the cabin. "I owe you my life, Arthur," Eleanor said softly. She noticed a faded photograph on his mantel. It showed a young boy with bright eyes. "Who is this?" she asked. Arthur's smile faded. He looked down at his calloused hands. "That is my son, Matt. I lost him 7 years ago." "He did not die," Arthur clarified, his voice thick with repressed grief. "He went up north to work the logging camps, trying to make good money. There was a terrible accident, a timber collapse. They told me his spine was crushed. The medical bills piled up. I lost my house trying to pay them. The state took over his care. They moved him to some underfunded facility across the country. I have not seen him since. I do not even know if he is still alive. He probably hates me for abandoning him." Arthur wiped a single tear from his weathered cheek. Eleanor felt a deep ache in her chest. This man had saved her from the dark, and yet he was living in his own kind of darkness. "Arthur," she said gently, "I have resources. I have investigators on retainer. Let me find him. Let me bring your boy home." Arthur looked at her, hope warring with fear in his tired eyes. "You really think you could?" Eleanor did not hesitate. She hired the best private investigators in the state. She poured money into the search. Within a week, a thick manila folder was delivered to her desk. They had found Matt. He was living in a neglected state care facility in rural Oregon. He was paralyzed from the waist down, depressed, and entirely alone. Eleanor drove straight to the cemetery in the middle of the night. She pounded on Arthur's door. "Pack a bag," she told him when he opened it, bewildered in his pajamas. "We are going to Oregon. We are flying out on my private jet at dawn. We found him, Arthur. We found Matt." The old man fell to his knees on the porch, sobbing uncontrollably. Buster howled, sensing his master's overwhelming emotion. Eleanor knelt in the dirt and hugged the old man. "We are bringing him back. I promise you." The state facility smelled of bleach and boiled cabbage. The fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively overhead. Eleanor held Arthur's arm as they walked down the bleak corridor. The nurse pointed to a room at the end of the hall. Arthur's hands were shaking violently. He pushed the door open. Matt was sitting in a rusted wheelchair by a dirty window, staring blankly at the parking lot. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow. "Matt!" Arthur choked out. The younger man turned. He stared at his father for a long moment, disbelief washing over his face. "Dad," he whispered. Arthur ran across the room and collapsed in front of the wheelchair, burying his face in his son's lap. "I am so sorry," Arthur cried. "I never stopped looking. I never stopped loving you." Matt stroked his father's grey hair, tears streaming down his own face. "It is okay, Dad. You are here now. You are here." Eleanor did not just bring Matt home. She used her massive fortune to transfer him to the most elite private spinal research hospital in New York. Dr. Harrison, a leading neurosurgeon, reviewed Matt's old charts. "The damage is severe," the doctor admitted in his plush office. "But medical technology has advanced light years since his accident. There is a new surgical procedure. It is risky, but it could restore nerve function. He might walk again." Matt, sitting in his new, high-tech wheelchair, looked at Eleanor. "Why are you doing all this for me?" he asked. "You do not even know me." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Your father gave me my life back. This is the least I can do. We scheduled the surgery immediately. Money is absolutely no object." The hospital buzzed with preparation. Hope had finally returned to Arthur's broken family. The day of the surgery arrived. The tension in the waiting room was unbearable. Arthur paced the floor, wearing down the carpet. Hours ticked by like days. Suddenly, a nurse burst through the surgical doors. "We have a complication. Matt is bleeding heavily. We need a transfusion, but he has an extremely rare blood type, AB negative. The blood bank is empty. We need a donor right now." Eleanor jumped up. "I am AB negative. Take my blood." The nurse rushed her into a side room, prepping a needle. As the blood flowed through the tubes, Dr. Harrison stepped in. "This is highly unusual, Eleanor. A B negative is rare enough, but the genetic markers in your blood profile are almost identical to the patient's. Were you two related?" Eleanor frowned, feeling dizzy. "No. My parents were wealthy socialites. I was an only child." Dr. Harrison looked troubled. "You might want to take a DNA test." A week later, Matt was recovering beautifully in the intensive care unit. He could already wiggle his toes. The surgery was a massive success. Eleanor walked into the room holding a sealed white envelope. Arthur was sitting by the bed. She handed the envelope to Arthur. The DNA test results. Arthur opened it with trembling fingers. He read the clinical text, his eyes widening in absolute shock. "The probability of sibling relation is 99.9%. Arthur dropped the paper. He looked at Eleanor, then at Matt. "My wife, Sarah. She gave birth to twins at the county hospital. A boy and a girl. But the doctor told me the little girl was stillborn. They never let me see her body. Eleanor's hands covered her mouth. My parents. They desperately wanted a child. They paid the hospital to steal a baby. They stole me from you. The room fell into a stunned, emotional silence. The realization hit them like a freight train. Eleanor Vance, the billionaire heiress, was actually the daughter of a humble gravedigger. She was Matt's twin sister. Arthur wept, pulling Eleanor into a desperate, crushing hug. I lost my wife that day, and I thought I lost my daughter. I have my little girl back. Eleanor cried into his shoulder. She had grown up in a cold, massive mansion with parents who threw money at her instead of love. Now she had a real father, a real brother. They spent the next few weeks bonding, sharing stories, making up for 30 years of stolen time. But the joy was abruptly shattered one Tuesday morning. Sheriff Davis called Eleanor's private line. His voice was grim. Eleanor, you need to lock down the estate. Julian was being transported to the maximum security prison. His transport van was attacked. He escaped. He is out there. Panic surged through the Vanderwood estate. Eleanor upgraded the security system, installing cameras and reinforced doors. She needed a personal bodyguard, someone who could live at the house and protect her family. The agency sent over their top candidate. His name was Carter Hayes. He was a towering, broad-shouldered man with a quiet, intense demeanour. The left side of his face and neck bore heavy, faded burn scars. I was a firefighter in Chicago, Carter explained during the interview, his voice a deep baritone. A roof collapsed during a rescue. After I recovered, I moved into private security. I do not scare easily, Miss Vance, and I do not let anyone pass me. Eleanor looked into his sharp, observant eyes. She felt an immediate sense of safety. The scars did not frighten her. They were proof that he survived the fire. You are hired, Carter. Start immediately. Carter was relentless. He checked every window, every lock, every shadow. He set up a cot in the downstairs library to monitor the camera feeds all night. As the weeks dragged on with no sign of Julian, the crushing tension slowly morphed into a strange, comfortable domesticity. Eleanor found herself wandering down to the kitchen late at night, making coffee for Carter. They would sit at the marble island, talking for hours. Carter told her about his life before the fire. Eleanor told him about the terrifying darkness of the coffin. He was a fantastic listener. He never judged her. He treated her not as a fragile victim, but as a warrior. One night, while reviewing security footage, Carter's hand brushed against hers. The spark was electric. Eleanor looked up at his scarred face. She saw only strength and kindness. He leaned in, and their lips met in a slow, desperate kiss. The romance blossomed quickly. The fear of Julian's return was overshadowed by the fierce, protective love Carter offered her. To ease the stress, Carter suggested a weekend trip to Eleanor's remote lake cabin in the Adirondacks. Nobody knows about this place. It is completely off the grid. It will be safe, Carter promised. They spent 2 beautiful, peaceful days hiking, fishing, and sitting by the fire. It felt like paradise. But paradise was an illusion. On the 3rd night, a window shattered in the living room. The alarm screamed. Carter instantly drew his weapon, pushing Eleanor behind the heavy stone fireplace. Julian stepped through the broken glass, holding a hunting rifle. 2 large, heavily tattooed thugs followed him in. "Hello, dear wife." Julian smiled, his eyes wild and crazy. "Did you really think a few rent-a-cops could keep me away from my inheritance?" The cabin erupted in chaos. Carter fired 2 shots, hitting one of the thugs in the shoulder. The man went down screaming. Julian fired the rifle blindly, the bullet shattering the stone near Eleanor's head. "Run!" Carter roared, shoving Eleanor toward the back door. The second thug tackled Carter to the ground. A brutal, bloody fistfight broke out. Carter was incredibly strong, but he was outnumbered. Julian aimed the rifle at Eleanor's fleeing back. Carter saw it happen in slow motion. With a massive surge of adrenaline, he threw the thug off him and lunged into the line of fire. The rifle cracked. Carter took the bullet to his chest, collapsing onto the hardwood floor. Sirens wailed in the distance. Sheriff Davis had been tracking Julian's stolen vehicle. Police swarmed the cabin, tackling Julian to the floor. Eleanor screamed, dropping to her knees beside Carter's bleeding body. "Stay with me!" she sobbed, pressing her hands against his wound. The hospital waiting room was a familiar nightmare. Eleanor sat covered in Carter's blood, her father Arthur holding her tightly. Matt rolled his wheelchair over, grasping her hand. Hours passed. Finally, the surgeon emerged. The bullet missed his heart by an inch. He is going to make it. The relief was so absolute that Eleanor nearly fainted. The next morning, she sat by Carter's hospital bed. He slowly opened his tired eyes and managed a weak smile. "Did we win?" he croaked. "Yes, my brave firefighter. We won." Eleanor kissed his forehead, her tears mixing with his bandages. "Julian is going away for the rest of his life. And there is something else you need to know. I fainted in the waiting room. They ran some blood tests. Carter, I am pregnant. We are having a baby." Carter's eyes widened, filling with happy tears. He squeezed her hand tightly. "A new family," he whispered. A year later, the sprawling lawns of the Vanderwood estate were bathed in warm summer sunlight. White chairs were lined up beneath the grand oak trees. Eleanor stood in a stunning silk wedding gown, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Her baby bump was just beginning to show. Arthur, wearing a sharp tuxedo, offered her his arm. "Ready, my beautiful daughter." He smiled. "I have never been more ready," she replied. They walked down the grassy aisle together. Matt stood at the altar, leaning confidently on a polished wooden cane, and there, waiting for her, was Carter. His scars had healed, blending into the rugged landscape of his handsome face. He looked at her like she was the only woman in the universe. She had survived the grave. She had defeated monsters, and she had built an empire of love from the ashes of betrayal. Thank you so much for listening to this incredible story. If Eleanor's journey of survival and justice inspired you, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment below. What would you do if you woke up in the dark? Let us know.